everybody, this is Carter, and welcome to this episode of Making It Up. It's the podcast where I get to sit down and talk to other writers, and going on, over 100 episodes now. So I've gotten to know some very cool people, and hear their stories and hear about their writing journey. And it's different for everybody, and there's a lot of similarities to everybody. But I'm always curious to hear, like, what was it that worked for you? What was it that got you that book sold, that got you onto the New York Times bestsellers list? And it's fascinating. I mean, there's very little you could do with that information because, one thing I know for sure is there's no surefire way of doing anything as a writer. And that was kind of a theme of the conversation I just had with the brilliant and talented Martin Clark. So Martin Clark was a circuit court judge for 27 years, all the while that he was writing. And, he had a very fortunate incident in college where he was befriended and mentored by Tom Wolfe. Even though he wasn't necessarily studying to become a writer, he had an interest in writing, and Tom Wolfe became his mentor. So that was certainly helpful in order to kickstart a career on writing, although it took, I think, what he references 2 decades to get that first book sold. And then with, obviously it was a fantastic book, but then also as he describes it, it kind of just takes one person in the right place at the right time to really help you get your career off. And in that case, it was a reviewer from the New York Times who called him a thinking man's John Grisham, and books started flying off the shelves. And as he states it, he hasn't looked back from there. It's just been going well. So he's retired now as a judge, and he's writing full time. Now his most recent book just came out. And let me find it here. I should know this off the top of my head. The Plinko Bounce just came out on September 12th. And so make sure to check that book out for sure. It looks fantastic. But this is a very entertaining conversation I had. It was real inside baseball, talking about the publishing industry and just kind of the futility of being a writer, and then good things just suddenly happening and you having very little control of anything. So you're going to like this one. This is my conversation with Martin Clark. How's it going, man?
No worries. At long last, we connect.
Yeah. Sorry about that. It was probably my fault because it wouldn't have been the first time that's happened on this podcast.
Yeah, well, I'm learning what it's like not to have somebody to do my scheduling for me. It's not going well for me, so it probably could have been on my end also. So nice in the day job to have somebody to take care of that stuff for me.
So you left your day job and now are just writing full time?
Yeah, I retired. I was a circuit court judge, and
that's right.
Yeah, I started when I was 32, so I had a bunch of time in, and I quit when I was 59, and now I have one job that I really like.
Well, so it's funny. I'm kind of going through a somewhat of a similar thing, not quite the same. I'm 53, and I've been a hotel consultant my entire life. I never studied English, never studied writing, never had any aspirations to be a writer, so I've always been in business. And so I've always figured out a way how to write and have a day job because you're crazy not to, right? But my whole consulting division was shut down after we got acquired by this multinational earlier this year. So I'm living the life of a full-time writer and not kind of looking for anything else right now, but also knowing that it's just not going to last. I gotta make some real money.
What was your gig what did you do in the hotel business?
I went to hotel.
I've never heard of it.
Yeah, I went to hotel school and I studied real estate finance, but I was basically a consultant to the industry. So I would talk, I would do a lot of public speaking about the trends of the hotel industry, and individual clients might hire me to tell them either what their hotel is valued at or find a site for development. And so hotel consulting. Yeah. Yeah. So it was a lucrative gig. And I'm like, I'll fall back on my writing.
Yeah. Well, it's a good thing that I had a day job with a paycheck coming in for 20 years of rejection letters. I can tell you that.
Yeah. So I want to walk through all of that. So because that's, that's a pretty standard story, but it varies from person to person. And speaking as somebody who has had an undue amount of rejection in my life from the writing side. So where are you writing? Where do you live?
I'm in Patrick County, Virginia. That's South Side, Virginia. I don't know if you know much about the geography here. I'm near Roanoke, Virginia.
Okay.
I'm actually very close to Winston-Salem, North Carolina. I live right on the border.
Okay.
That's where Wake Forest University is.
So you're born and raised in that area or in the South?
Yeah. I was born here and left for different things and came back here to practice law, then went to work as a judge, and now I'm here for good, I think.
Yeah, awesome. So now growing up in that area, were you, I've talked to a few authors who were either judges or lawyers who became writers. But I'm always curious to know kind of that intersection of your passion for something other than writing and your roots of creativity. So as growing up, do you have a memory of either being a big reader or having any kind of aspirations for writing, or it wasn't even on your radar?
My mom was a teacher. She was a second grade teacher, and my dad was one of those guys who said, son, if you can read, you can do anything, which really isn't true, but it's kind of true. Now it's more along the lines of if you can get into YouTube, you can do anything.
Right.
My dad was a lawyer, so he had an interest in words and wordsmithing. And early on, I liked reading. I decided in college that I really had a passion for writing and started then. In terms of what I really like doing, it has nothing to do with writing or words. I love fly fishing.
Oh, yeah. Well, everybody needs that kind of other part of their life, right?
Yeah.
So you're going to college and you say you got into writing, but what were you? I mean, you were obviously, I guess, pre-law undergraduate. But what was it that got you into writing?
Actually, I was a classics major. And I did Latin in the classics. And I'm not sure. I liked creating. I liked, leaving sort of where I was in the rhythms of another world, if that makes any sense. It probably does since you're a writer. And I had a wonderful professor. Not everyone can write, and not everyone can teach writing. And Dr. Tony Abbott could write, and he could teach writing. And that was a good combo. And he encouraged me. I became interested. And late in my I guess I was a junior in college at Davidson, and I met Tom Wolfe.
Oh, wow.
And Mr. Wolfe became my mentor and encouraged me and held my hand and took care of me for years. It's embarrassing to say that for 2 decades with Tom Wolfe toting your manuscript around Manhattan, you still got rejected.
But also with Tom Wolfe as a mentor, you kind of you can't just give up on it either. You've got an obligation to see that through. So you had a manuscript then, or not in college. Did you have a manuscript, or this was post-college?
I began writing The Many Aspects of Mobile Home Living, which is my first book. I began writing that in college. And 20 years later, it was published. Gary Fisketjon and Knopf bought it. And there's still riffs in that book that I wrote that made it over those 2 decades that I wrote when I was in college.
That's amazing.
And I will say in my own defense, part of my issue was that I just never finished anything. I would write a little bit, maybe 3 chapters, and here's the plan, here are my grand designs, and I'd like for you to buy this. And you and I now know, in retrospect, nobody's going to do that. And when I was about 38 or 39, I had a really good friend who was published. And I don't say this to be any more vainglorious than I actually am, but I knew that I was a better writer than my buddy. And Mr. Wolfe sent me a letter. He says, you've got, and he had this wonderful script, this calligraphy and little pictures. And each letter was sort of a little art treasure. And he said, please finish the freaking novel. And at that point, I sat down. I said, I'm going to do it. I'm going to sit down and write and get it done. And I did. And then it sold finally.
Well, there's a lot to unpack there, but that's amazing. I mean, my first comment is like, the reality of it is, you know, being a better writer is maybe only part of the battle of actually getting published.
Yeah.
You know, as we found out, I mean, so much of it is just timing. Is the market right for this?
Yes.
You know, and that's how the rejections. Like, I can think of through my first 3 books didn't sell, even though I had an agent. And, you know, I don't think a single rejection said they didn't like the writing. So then you feel very like, Jesus, what do I have to do? And sometimes it's got to hit. It's just got to be right for the right person at the right time. And that's a lot more luck than I think people understand who are outside the industry.
My agent used to tell me it just takes one. And it really does just take, you need the right person on the right day in the right place to say, you know, I really like Carter's book and I think I want to buy it. That just takes one person.
Right.
And once you get into it, once somebody buys it, it takes about 2 or 3 people in the right place to give you a good review, a boost, or say something kind about your book for it to catch fire. And as you said, and I say that all the time, it's just luck and timing.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, catch fire might just be kind of a steady smolder. And sometimes that's enough. I mean, you know, I think there's this kind of perception that, you know, if you're a writer, you must be doing that full time. You must be making gobs of money. And there's the other perception of like, you know, it's really hard to get sold and most people never publish. And I think the reality of it is like you can publish, but the reality of actually making gobs of money is very low, but you can figure shit out. You can, you know, cultivate a career with the help of your publisher to steadily, slowly get bigger and bigger and bigger. At some point, it's going to become, you've got a backlist people are buying. It's a steady income. It might not be supporting you fully, but it can happen. But it's a long time to do that. I've been at it 20 years and I'm still figuring it out.
It's amazing how many really good writers have a side hustle. And I don't mean that to sort of demean what they're doing, but so many folks are professors, teachers, or you actually have a day job. And the longer I do this, the more apparent it becomes to me that there are very few full-time writers who are living really, really well.
Right. As the sole breadwinner.
Right. And I think it's very discouraging and misleading for people. One of the things I always say is that you frequently, you read about what I call the People magazine lotto winner, and you see that and you think that's the way it works. And you read the story about a really talented writer, and she was, after she put the kids to bed, she wrote a little bit each night and finished perhaps the manuscript on the train going to town. The first agent loved it. Then there was a bidding war. Millions were paid. Hugh Jackman shows up in the limo and buys the film rights, and you're off and running. That is so rare. And you know this. I mean, you met probably more people, but folks see that, and it doesn't happen for you with that first submission, and you become a little dispirited.
Right. And even if what's amazing to me is even if that does happen, as rare as it is, everyone thinks, well, okay, that's just how it is for the rest of your life. And that's not true at all. Your next book could flounder. And that's the thing is like, it's the inconsistency of income. And the only thing I know for sure is that there's no linear progression. You know, I see it time and time again. People hit it big and flounder. People flounder for 20 years and finally have a breakthrough. But it's never steady state.
I have one acquaintance and one good friend, and each had a blockbuster book. And literally there was, you know, the agents taking the offers for the second books, and both second books, or I don't know if, maybe not, but the subsequent book, the follow-up, the next book after the blockbuster, and they were bombs. And it almost ruined you. Then suddenly at one point, you're a really talented writer. You're worth literally millions of dollars. And that book, for whatever reason, doesn't sell. And now you're radioactive.
Right. Totally. And if you don't earn out that massive advance, especially if it's that first time, then you might what people don't understand, you might as well change your name at that point and people do, because they're not going to buy that book again. And it might not be that it's sold because it was like this, seminal book. It might have just all kind of clicked together, and then the publishers misjudged the market. You never know.
The other side of that coin, or the cousin to that, and I'm not sure how to pronounce the name, Jerzy Kosinski. Do you know who wrote, what was it? I've forgotten the book that he wrote. I think it was a Pulitzer winner. And a frustrated, maybe Painted Bird. I'm sorry, I can't remember the name of the book, but it was a big, popular, well-received book. And a frustrated writer who kept getting turned down basically just typed up that manuscript and sent it in and watched it get turned down again and again and again. Though someone did say, this reminds me a little bit of, I don't know how you say it, maybe Jerry Kosinski. I've forgotten his name. It's an old story, but true.
Yeah.
So that's the other cousin to it.
Right. It's coming from a very strong business background, trying to understand the opacity of the publishing industry is impossible. You try to look for the logic, and I'm with Sourcebooks, who happens to be extremely data centric, which speaks to me. But even that, everyone's just kind of guessing, and it's so frustrating. But there's also something kind of cool about it too, because I think one of the great things about writing, regardless of your age, is the best may always be yet to come. And not a whole lot of professions you can say that in. It might be 80 and then I'll have this massive breakthrough. I'm like, damn, about time.
What a cool thought. I've never really, and the other thing about it is I've my new book just released, and you just never know. And occasionally you're thunderstruck. Something happens nobody sees coming. And so it's always fun there's all that anticipation. Maybe this will happen. Maybe that will happen. Maybe Hugh Jackman will come by in the limo.
Right.
And there's always something positive and fun to look forward to. I have often thought that there should be some way for all of us, and I know there's some, embarrassment's not the right word, but I guess just everyone wants to be perceived as doing well. It would be nice if we, on our end of the equation, if writers like you and I are doing, could sit down and talk and share information. This is my editor. This is my publisher. Mm-hmm. This is how much I got paid. This is how many books I sold last time, how many I sold this time. There's no need to exaggerate it. And that would really, I think, help us all peg what we are doing in the marketplace.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And I've always been interested in the number side of things too. And you're right, because, people do want to, even just showing that you have a book out, that feels like a monumental thing. And it is a monumental thing, but it doesn't speak at all to the success of it. I a few years ago, I wasn't at a breaking point, but I was I was at a point where I just wanted to understand exactly what you just said. I wanted to have conversations with my peers, just to see, am I trending in the right direction? Should I be looking at different things? And so I reached out to 3 different authors who I knew, and we just had private conversations for like an hour for exactly that. Just like, can we just share information? Because I'm just trying to understand if I'm doing this right, or if whatever I can control, I'm controlling correctly. But very few people do that. You have to be really close with somebody to be able to have that conversation.
And I have friends I've met along the way now, and I've had those conversations. But then again, if you're talking to 2 or 3 people, you're not getting a really great data sample, but at least you get a sense of what's going on out there, what's fair, what to expect. And that's a positive. I almost wish there were just like a data bank that we could all anonymously, MC entered this data, CW entered this data. Here's how many books I sold. And my former editor, Gary Fiskajohn, used to say I would ask him, could we replicate what we did last time? Can we do this? Here, let's try this. And he would say, Martin, if we knew what sparked a bestseller, we would do it every single time. Right. And some of that is just magic and alchemy.
It is. And some of it is, so, if I look at your books, for example, you're getting great attention from great trade magazines, New York Times, things like that. You have to have a good book to get to that point, to get that kind of attention. But you can have a good book and not get any of that attention. So a lot of it, some of it has to do with who your publisher is, their relationships with the reviewers. Are you being published in hardcover or trade paperback? That makes a difference. So because, you look at somebody from like the New York Times, and just to get a review, the amount of books that they get on their desk,
goodness,
they can't even touch probably 90% of them. So, how do you get reviewed? But when you do get a good review in the New York Times, that does help for sure. It doesn't guarantee anything, but it helps. So and you ask these questions to your publisher, like, how do we get there? And they're like, well, we're trying, we're submitting it and you realize there's only so much they can control as well. And there's only so many dollars they can put into a PR budget. And that's another thing I wanted to ask you about. As you're going through your launches and your recent launches, I think about a month ago, are you, you seem very analytical to me. Do you study like what we did last time was X, Y, and Z, and so we want to do that again? Or are you thinking like, do I need to hire my own outside PR firm to help? How do you approach the actual marketing of a launch?
My problem is that almost everything, I'm a slow pen since 4 years ago that my last book came out. And if you anchor back even further than that, back to 2000 when my first book came out, it's just a sea change. Back in the day, like we need our ad, the New York Times, we'll do a couple of magazines, we'll line you up to do some radio shows, we'll send you on the road, and we'll get reviews. And almost every newspaper, even regionally where I live, the Roanoke Times, the Richmond Times-Dispatch, there were book sections. Fast forward to today, to 2023, and one of the things I did is I went through sort of my notes and reviews and the old files. I said, these are papers who gave me good reviews, and so I submit those to Alexandra at Rare Bird, and they're not in business anymore. Martin, they're not going to review you.
Yeah. Oh, they don't have a book section. Yeah.
And if they are still in business, they may publish 3 times per week, and then you would be in the extra section or the feature section. Right. So that has really changed, and I learned the term with my third book. You can get a good review that's not a selling review. And I recently had a couple of friends who were reviewed both in with great books. One book I blurbed in the New York Times and in the Washington Post Book World, it's called. And the reviews were really great and deservedly so, but they weren't reviews, even though they were laudatory, that were going to move books. And read the book, and you read the review, and you're like, this seems like a really good book. I'm just not sure it has the hook that I want. And I think maybe that almost did them a disservice. You want to get those good reviews, and you can take the pull quotes and use them, and I'm sure it's all, some books walked out the door. But every good review is not a selling review, a term I learned several years ago. So this time for me, the remarkable thing for me at age 64, and I'm Fred Flintstone. I have only a Facebook account. Mm-hmm. I just saw Ted Lasso. Mm-hmm. It was on Ted Lasso. One of the characters said the only people on Facebook are grandparents and child abusers. I'm like, dude, I'm neither one, but I am on Facebook. And it's so antiquated, and I think and I'm not sure it lands well or has the impact you'd like. And one of the reasons that I signed up where I signed up is because everyone there, they are folks that they're the people I'm not. They're hungry, young, hip, and smart. And so we have this whole discussion about Instagram. I know
with your publisher? You're having this discussion.
Yeah, and the publicist and the marketing people.
Right.
And I'm like, no, I don't know any book influencers. I don't even know. I mean, the term itself is something I've seen on dating shows on TV. Everybody on Temptation Island is an influencer. Everybody on Bachelor in Paradise is an influencer. And I just blew it off. And then my wife, who is on Instagram, with Zelda and Clarence, our dogs, who have 5,000 followers in their canine. They're canine influencers. She starts seeing the Plinko Bounce, the hashtags pop up. And I look at a couple of them, and these people have, I'm not exaggerating, 40,000 followers. Right. And if you get a good word there, it doesn't take a lot of clicks on the buy button to sell some books for you. I mean, just a small percentage of their eyeballs. Yeah. And so it has really changed in terms of what works and sells. You still, of course, have the big, I guess, sort of book clubs, Reese's, Oprah.
Oh, those are still very substantial and weighty.
But sort of outside of that, and reviews at the New York Times, probably LA and DC will certainly be impactful. But outside of that, I'm just not real sure exactly. Maybe appearing on Making It Up. I'm making on.
This is it. This is your big break, Ryan.
I need to ride your coattails, brother. That's what I need.
But you make a good point, because I always hire my own PR firm in addition to work with my in-house PR firm, and my in-house PR firm is fantastic. And they will then, to your point with the influencers, they will identify a list of maybe 200 influencers that all have at least 40,000 followers, who their whole account is to review maybe not only books, but specifically, suspense and thrillers, which is what I write. And if you can coordinate all those influencers to post your cover reveal on the same day, it's crazy. It's like people are just like, wow, I've been seeing this book everywhere today. And it's like, well, they just do that because that's how they gain followers, and they just have a love to read. So it takes a very smart publicist to keep on top of that and cultivate and maintain those relationships. And that's something that as authors, we just don't have any aptitude or interest in really doing, which is just too much.
Yeah, I was the only thing that I have that wasn't that isn't static that I posted on Facebook was the trailer for that the recorded books did for the audio, which was really cool. I like that, but the notion that I could make a 10-second video or something that would capture folks' attention, it's just so foreign to me, and I'm just too stubborn to really try it. But thank goodness they're smart, insightful, dialed in folks who are helping me. It's very much to me akin to years ago, after so much frustration and disappointment, when I learned that I was going to sell my first book. My agent said to me, "We have a little holdup. We're trying to negotiate ebook rights." And I said to him, "Sign the damn deal. It's a gimmick. Nobody is ever going to buy an ebook. It's a gimmick. It'll be gone. I don't care what I get. I don't care if I get zero. Don't hold this deal up over that." And of course, now probably my distribution is half and half,
right?
Especially as the book gets a little older, and then it's offered on some site or another for, you can get the ebook for $4.99 or something,
right? Like and promotion.
But yeah, that's exactly right. And so, and I was equally as insightful about Instagram and where the world is now. And so thank goodness I've had people who've been conscientious and patient with me to save me from myself.
Yeah, totally. And, and at some point you have to just also rely on people who have that greater expertise, trying to do everything is, and you you could see evidence of that when you follow certain people on like Instagram or Facebook, and you see that this person has obviously been told exactly what to do because it just doesn't look organic at all. Or all they're doing is posting about their book and nothing else, which is going to always fall on flat ears for sure. So I'm curious a little bit, you've referenced it a couple times, but just your publication journey sounds like it was initially rife with rejection. So you finished this book at the demand of Tom Wolfe, and you finished it, and then you were able to get an agent with that book, I assume.
Yes.
And then what was that process like of your agent shopping it to publishers?
It still took a while.
Yeah.
But we did have Mr. Wolfe's imprimatur, and that helped. And then, one day, Gary Fiske-John decided he liked it and was going to buy it, and it was published. And not long after that, Dwight Garner at the New York Times loved it. And again, that's what we were talking about earlier. You just need one person in the right place. And I've said many times, if I'm ever in New York and Dwight Garner wants me to come shine his shoes, carry his groceries, whatever he needs, I'm your boy. And he wrote a piece in the New York Times and said, Martin Clark is the thinking man's John Grisham. And books just flew off the shelf. We ran out of books. And this was back when when this would be in the, I guess, 2001, 2, something like that, when that really was just a huge, it was a huge hit.
Yeah.
It was before Instagram influencers.
Well, you think about the circulation of the New York Times back in 2001 versus now.
And the book that I literally could not give away, I don't know, I'd just be curious if you've ever done this. Did you get to a point where you tell your agent, I don't care about being paid. I just want to see it published. I want to be able to walk into my local independent bookstore and pull it off the shelf. That's all I want. I don't want to be paid. And the book that I literally could not give away is suddenly just everywhere. And suddenly,
that's so.
I was a bum, and suddenly I'm the thinking man's John Grisham, and then that snowballs into good review after good review, and I've been off and running ever since. After 2 decades of disappointment, did you ever do that? Did you ever just want to give it away just to see it published?
Well, I mean, I think the de facto reality for me was, I was going to take whatever offer that there was, and so my very first. So it's basically no money. I remember after 3 books not selling, and I really studied those rejection letters because I'm like, okay, this is gold here. So my 4th book finally sold, but it sold to a publisher that was probably had just been around for about a year, and it went out of business 6 months after my book came out. So I think my first advance was $2,000, and they ended up only paying $1,000 because they went. But because I'm very goal oriented, and my goal was, to your point, I just want to see a physical copy of my book on the bookshelf at Borders at the time, so I can show my kids. And for me, that was enough at the time until you start setting bigger and bigger goals. But just having, because even that fraction of a reality of having that happen is still more than most authors ever get to experience, which is crazy as well. But I at the time, I'm like, I am so fortunate because even though I'm going to make no money on this book, I got published, and not a lot of people can say that. So I try to be grateful for every book that sells.
And you touched on something that I've said a lot. It's, what is the Springsteen line? Poor man want to be rich. Rich man want to be king. King ain't satisfied till he rules everything. Mm-hmm. First, you just want to be published. Just see it on the shelf. Yeah, well, now I would really like to get good reviews. Now I'd like to be on a bestseller list. Now I would like to have a really good audio. Now I would like to be optioned to the movies. Now I would like, and it just keeps going. Right. It's addictive. Well, right. And I think that's normal. But I was that way as well. And then and after the first one, you find yourself looking around corners.
Right.
The first one, everything is new. I Publishers Weekly. Wow, that's new.
Right.
Book tour. I'm going to Square Books. That's so cool.
Yeah.
Now it's almost an anxious sense. Wonder what is going to happen in PW. I wonder what's going to happen with this review.
Yeah. Those 2 months before the book comes out, you're just like, your stomach's in knots.
And then book tour. I mean, I don't know about you, but I have done gigs and no one showed up. No one.
I was flown to a place and nobody showed up.
I'm close. I was in Lexington, Kentucky at Joseph Beth, and they're a huge. They're a giant. They have big mailing lists, big book clubs. I was in Miami, at Books and Books or something like that, and the day before had an unexpectedly big crowd. I did the little radio, the local radio show from Florida, prepping. I'm going to be here. It's great, and we'll see you in Lexington tomorrow. No one. I mean, zero. No one came, and the booksellers are so embarrassed, and you're so sweet. It's like a Tuesday night, and they tell me, well, there are a lot of church meetings.
Right.
I said, oh, Tuesday nights?
Right.
And we started trying to give it away, and it was as if we were doing a credit card application. No, free trips, free points, nothing.
Yeah.
And then literally could not give one away. So, I never thought about that the first time that I was out on the road. I was just happy to be out on the road and go into a store and have 2 people show up.
Right.
And to this day, I'm looking around the corners and saying, geez, it'd be embarrassing if no one comes tonight.
Yeah, totally. I know. I get very anxious because I'm very comfortable public speaking. I've done a lot of it. And, I can be in front of a crowd of 1,000 and that's my comfort zone. But in front of 2 people, I'm just like, oh my God, like, just please. But that's the reality. And you've got to accept that as well, I've got that story now.
Well, and it may be apocryphal, but the story I've forgotten. The writer who you show up and there are 2 people. You say, "Hey, I'll just buy you a beer. Let's go get a beer.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just go hang out." And I will say this: the one thing about small crowds, you never know who's going to be in that crowd.
Right.
I did a gig in Florida, Atlantic Beach, Florida, and I met I guess my second book, and I met a wonderful bookseller who remains a friend to this day and has been so kind to me. And I think I had 2 people show up, and I was happy. We talked. I spent a lot of time. I actually enjoyed it.
Yeah.
And then so 3 weeks later, she's on NPR recommending summer books, and she said, "Let me tell you about a really great book."
Wow.
From say I learned that lesson. You just never know.
Right. Right.
Who might be in your audience. If it's zero, you're not reaching many people.
Right.
But maybe one of those 3 people will be, who knows?
Right. And you have to, and I think a lot of authors don't quite either embrace this or get this or care about this. But in my opinion, you have to really understand how to present yourself to the public. And, because how many times have you been to an author event where they don't look comfortable and they just get up and they start reading from their book, which I think is poisonous. I'm not a fan of readings at all. I will do it if I have to, but I'll limit it to like 5 minutes. But so when you show up and you have this whole speech plan and 2 people are there, you have to pivot and you have to become very conversational, very engaged. And a lot of authors, I think, aren't good at that, and that hurts future chances of appearances, I think.
Yeah. I think I told you when we first corresponded, my bailiff, I think, has read all or most of
yeah, that's nice.
Of your books. Do you do, speaking of getting into other people's business, do you do contracts such that you have to deliver, you sign like a 2-book contract, 3-book contract, and you have a time sort of for delivery in that?
I have. I typically work on a case-by-case basis, but I have signed multi-book deals before.
Okay.
But the thing with me is, so I write, all mine are standalone thrillers. All mine, I don't outline. So I never know where the book is going. And I try to go for the most unique idea I can think of, which isn't always the best idea, but it's just more, it's more fun for me. So that creates a little bit of a risk to a publisher who doesn't know what they're going to get next, as opposed to somebody who's writing a series. So it's actually funny. Tomorrow, Friday the 13th, we're submitting to my publisher my option material. And so I have no idea. They have no idea what the book is about. They didn't even know that I've written the book. And they're just going to see, okay, here's your next book. And yeah, we'll see what happens. Hopefully they want it.
How long did it take you to write it?
That was a fast one. For me, that was fast. That was about 9 to 10 months.
Oh, wow.
I had to stop in the middle to do edits to what's coming out in April. Normally it takes me about a year, and that's like writing it, rewriting it a few times, and then rewriting it based on agent feedback. It's usually about a year to 14 months. I try to have a book come out every year, but we're currently in like a 2-year gap, so it's a little bit longer than normal. So yeah, and you said this was your first one in 4 years. So do you see now, retired, you're focused on writing, do you have a different timeline for yourself?
No, it's if you've done it the same way. I get up every morning about 5:30 or 6. I used to do that before work. And if you've done it the same way for decades, it's just sort of ingrained.
Sure.
And Tom Wolfe told me years ago, if you write a page a day, in a year you will have written a novel.
Yeah.
It's not really that formulaic and that simple, because often when I write that page, it's not any good. Right. Or you can salvage a paragraph or an idea or something out of it, or you just throw it away. But I've gotten no quicker having more time to write, because I'm just sort of geared to put in a good hour and a half, try to turn a page out, and then go back and read everything I've written.
Yep.
The one thing that has changed for me in writing is when you're not published, everybody is a critic. All my friends were loaded up with, this is bad, this is terrible, no one would do this. Once you get published and you get some attention, that shifts. Mm-hmm. And everybody just reads and says, oh, it's great. And you have to remind them that that's not helpful.
Right.
I need you I really appreciate your friendship, but I need you to be the same critical voice you were when you were making fun of me for using too much copy paper.
Right. You have to find your trusted voices, and that's not easy to do. And to this day, for me, that remains my agent, my editor, like are my most trusted, but critique groups and things like that. But even within those groups, not everybody you're going to be listening to. And that takes years to develop that ear, because if you made changes based on everyone's comments, your book would be all over the place. Because they're all saying, you listen, what are the commonalities of what they're saying? And do I agree with that? And trusting your own instinct, which is, as a writer, I think is the hardest thing, because you're so full of shame and embarrassment and imposter syndrome that it's hard to trust your instinct and have confidence. I don't know if during all your rejections, if you were kind of running into those issues.
A little bit. I just enjoyed it so much. Maybe I was too naive and too foolish to think about maybe I don't have any talent and this is just going nowhere. But I'm a review reader. Do you read your reviews?
I do. It depends on the time of public. So like right now, my book's coming out in April. So now I'm starting to get early reviews on Goodreads. So I'll read like the first 20, because I want to just get a pulse on like what I'm curious. Then I will just kind of track the number of reviews and the overall rating. But I tend then not to go into the weeds of reading the actual reviews, because it'll just piss me off.
I read everyone, and some, it is amazing. And I've started referring to some of them as not reviews, but me views. And
oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
This injection of people's politics into book reviews, usually poorly written. And speaking of Goodreads, I think you can go to Goodreads, and it's about the 4th or 5th review that I received. And it begins by saying, something along the lines of, I like studies of the legal system, and this is about the legal system, but I didn't really like it, and I didn't think it was accurate because all the characters are white. And that is just absolutely and completely untrue.
Right. Somebody who spent 27 years on the bench might know a thing or two.
And I wanted my story to reflect the demographics. I mean, I didn't sit down with quotas and I didn't sit down with a design, but in my new book, you have the judge who starts is a woman. The Commonwealth's attorney is African American, a woman identified as such. The most powerful lawyer in the book, the protagonist's friend, is an African American man identified as such. And I can go on, and that sort of tracks the world that I worked in. We had an African American Commonwealth's attorney. What are the other characters? And I asked him. One of the principal characters in the new book is Vikram Kapil, and I asked Vic, who's a real person, and he appears by name as a public defender in the book. And I said, Vic, are you a person of color? And he just laughed. He said he is American Indian, and or Indian American. I'm not sure exactly how I guess it's Indian American is how you would phrase that. And he says, I'm not really sure. But to say that everybody in my book is white, it's just untrue. And then you have this whole dynamic where, as a writer, you're admonished by your publisher and your publicist not to correct that, not to engage. And then if you do it, you'll be kicked off Goodreads and banished. And and so that we're clear. The other side of that equation is one of my, I think, probably my first Audible review refers to my book being filled with progressive nonsense and that I have Trump derangement syndrome. And seriously, I mean, so I've made somebody who's progressive unhappy and somebody who's conservative unhappy. And I thought about that, and the only line in my book that is vaguely political, one of the characters is talking about the past presidential election. He says, we have a choice between Caligula and Mr. Magoo. And I thought that was pretty even-handed. And I think it's about what 75% of the people in our country think today. And that somehow makes me anti-Trump, and I have Trump derangement syndrome. And there's little we can do about that. You can tell your friends to go in and engage, or you can ask for a correction. But to say, one, that my book is populated only by white people, it's just flat wrong, and the implication is offensive. And to say that I have written a book with a hidden agenda that is anti-Trump, truly you're talking about me views and not reviews.
Yeah, totally.
You wonder how they type those things with with the anger seething out of.
Yeah, totally. And you can't, like you said, you can't do anything about it. I had one of my books, I killed a dog in one of my books, which, say what you will about that. Yeah. But this was off camera, a dog you've never heard of or met before. It's literally just two cops in a scene in this police station saying, hey, we found this dog on the green belt. Its throat has been cut. That was the extent of it, right? So granted, maybe that's traumatic to some people, but the trigger warnings on Goodreads saying this book is full of animal cruelty and torture. And that's all that people see. And then you have all these other comments saying, thank you for letting me know I will never read this or any of this other author's book because he's killed this dog. And I'm like, motherfucker, John Wick, the old John Wick franchise is $3 billion because of a dead puppy.
That's right. Yeah.
So but you can't, what are you going to do? You just got to, that's part of the contract you agree to become a writer, is you have to take the slings and arrows.
And those reviews are always so stylistically sound with grammatical blunders, right? Just nonsense. Yeah. Just these, this is really Edmund Wilson I got working here.
Well, Zamar, we are going to wrap up. Before we do, we're going to do a very quick storytelling to get those.
Okay, I read this in the preview, and
This is why it's called Making It Up. So I've chosen 3 books, mostly at random from my bookshelf. You're going to choose one of the books. We're going to choose a random page, and I'm going to choose a sentence. I'm going to read that sentence, and then that'll be the first sentence in a 2-minute long short story. So you give me the next couple sentences, whatever comes to mind. I'll do a couple, and then I'll put us out of our misery at some point.
Maybe we could do a minute, maybe.
A speed, yeah, it might be. We've got Power Play by Joseph Finder. Stephen Hunter's Hot Springs. And John Grisham's non-legal book, A Painted House. So choose one of those.
What was my first one again?
Your first one was Power Play by Joseph Finder, yeah.
Yeah, okay, let's do that.
Okay, pick a page between 1 and 400.
13.
Okay, and I'm just going to quickly scour.
Okay.
Let's see. Okay, it's first person written.
Do you want to do another one? It'll be easier.
No, this is good.
Okay.
On this short drive over to the office, I kept thinking about that strange meeting.
It was the meeting when the deputy looked at me and said, "How did you arrive here?"
I didn't really expect that question. I thought it was going to be much more straightforward than that. Why was he wanting to know that? But I remember how clammy my palms got before I answered. I just knew he knew I was lying.
Even though it was a small lie, I was concerned with my clammy palms and flop sweat that he would see through me and discover the bigger lie behind the tiny lie.
Because that's what detectives do, isn't it? They just pick at and pull that tiny little thread, and before you know it, everything becomes unraveling. I knew it was only a matter of time when those innocent little questions turned into the big questions. The did you kill your wife question.
Even worse would be when the lawyers got hold of me and twisted questions, twisted the truth. And even though I might be guilty, I would look even more guilty than I actually was.
Perfect. Let's call it there.
Let's do
a straight up little legal thriller right there for you.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, that is pronounced Fender, not Finder.
I always thought it was Fender, but I could be wrong.
I don't know. I've always just seen it in print. So
yeah. It says I'm a member of ITW International Thriller Writers.
You would know.
And
you would know.
Yeah, so he's been around at those conferences and stuff. But
you would know.
Good. Listen, Martin, I'm so glad we got a chance to connect, and congratulations on your recent release. That's very exciting, and I hope we get to sit down and chat in person someday.
That would be great, and maybe our paths will cross somewhere along the way. And congratulations to you. And I will go back to the courthouse and be a celebrity with the staff there because I've hung out with you for an hour.
I feel very honored that the bailiff reads my books. That's very cool. All right, brother. We'll talk again.
All right. Take care. Happy day.
Bye.
Thanks for having me. Bye-bye.
That is it. That is my conversation with Martin Clark. Yeah, I really enjoyed that one. I felt like we connected. He was very down to earth, very affable, kind of guy you just kind of want to hang out with and talk shop. So I'm glad I got to do that for about an hour. And the story was good. I cut it off a little short because it was nice and tight. So before it started to spiral out of control, I cut it off, but I think it had potential for a great story. Maybe. I encourage you to go find out everything you can about Martin, and you can do so at his website, which is martinclark.com. And while you're on the internet, pop on over to my website, carterwilson.com. You can subscribe to my newsletter. You can buy my books. You can check out my appearances, all that good stuff. And I am going to be introducing new dates for writing retreats for next year. And I'm also starting to do one-on-one mentoring. So if you are a writer who is looking for a mentor and maybe someone to review your manuscripts, somebody to talk about social media, all that good stuff, I'm available for that. Just hop on over to my website and you can see the links and read more about that. That is it. I hope you enjoyed this one. I know I did. More episodes of Making It Up coming out very soon. In the meantime, take care.